The November wind howled across Fort Bragg like an angry ghost, cutting through layers of Army-issued PT gear as if they were paper. Dawn hadn't quite broken, leaving the sky a bruised purple-gray that promised a bitter day ahead. Street lights still flickered across the training grounds, casting long shadows over the assembled soldiers who stood in formation, their breath creating small clouds of mist in the freezing air. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood in the back row, her position deliberately chosen. At 32, she'd learned the value of staying out of the spotlight. Her black PT jacket was zipped all the way to her chin, the hood pulled tight around her face. While other soldiers around her bounced on their toes and swung their arms to fight off the cold, Sarah remained still, almost statuesque. Only those close enough could see the slight rigidity in her posture, the way she favored her right side ever so subtly. "Man, it's freezing," muttered Private First Class Jenkins, standing 2 spots to her left. He was fresh-faced, maybe 20 years old, still excited about morning PT despite the temperature. "Think the colonel will cut us some slack today." Sergeant Rodriguez, a barrel-chested man with 15 years of service etched into the lines of his face, snorted. "You obviously don't know Colonel Brennan. That man would run PT in a blizzard and call it character building." Sarah said nothing, her eyes fixed straight ahead. She'd only been at Fort Bragg for 3 weeks, assigned to the battalion staff after her medical clearance came through. She'd kept her head down, done her job, and tried to blend in. The last thing she wanted was attention. The last thing she needed was questions. "Formation, fall in." The command rang out from the front, and the casual chatter died instantly. Soldiers snapped to attention, rows straightening with military precision. The sound of boots shuffling into perfect alignment echoed across the field. Colonel James Brennan emerged from the battalion headquarters like a force of nature. He was a man carved from granite and expectations, 6 feet tall, with silver hair cut high and tight, and a jaw that looked like it had been chiseled for the sole purpose of intimidation. At 53, he could still outrun most of his soldiers and wasn't shy about proving it. He'd earned his rank through 3 decades of service, multiple deployments, and a reputation for maintaining the highest standards. Some called him tough but fair, others used less charitable descriptions. Brennan strode down the first row of soldiers, his eyes scanning each face, each uniform looking for any deviation from perfection. Behind him walked Command Sergeant Major Williams, a clipboard in hand, equally stern-faced. This was their ritual, the morning inspection before PT, where discipline was reinforced and standards were maintained. "Second platoon looking sharp," Brennan called out, his voice carrying across the formation. "First platoon, Specialist Morrison, tuck in that shirt. This isn't a beach resort." "Yes, sir." Morrison scrambled to comply. Sarah watched from her position in the back, her heart rate picking up slightly. She'd known this moment would come eventually. She'd been lucky these past 3 weeks, always managing to slip into formation late or positioned where the colonel's inspection didn't quite reach her. But luck, she'd learned in Afghanistan, always ran out eventually. The colonel moved methodically through the formation, offering praise where earned, corrections where needed. He believed in visible leadership, in knowing his soldiers, in maintaining standards that he felt had slipped in the modern army. To him, discipline wasn't optional, it was the foundation of everything. "Looking good, Sergeant Rodriguez," Brennan nodded approvingly as he passed. "I see you're setting the example." "Thank you, sir," Rodriguez replied crisply. Then Brennan's eyes swept across the back row, and Sarah felt his gaze land on her like a spotlight. Even from 30 feet away, she could sense his attention shifting, focusing. His stride changed direction. "What do we have here?" His voice carried that particular tone, the one drill sergeants perfected, the one that made soldiers' spines straighten involuntarily. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes forward, her posture rigid. Around her, other soldiers seemed to lean slightly away, as if proximity to whatever was about to happen might be contagious. Brennan closed the distance, his boots crunching on the gravel. Up close, his presence was even more imposing. He stopped directly in front of Sarah, his eyes moving from her hooded face down to her fully zipped jacket, then to the other soldiers in t-shirts despite the cold. "Captain," he glanced at her name tape, "Mitchell. Care to explain why you're dressed for an Arctic expedition while your fellow soldiers are in proper PT attire?" The formation had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting. Sarah could feel dozens of eyes on her back, could sense the collective held breath of the battalion. "Sir, I have," she began, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "I'm not interested in excuses, Captain," Brennan cut her off, his voice sharp. "I'm interested in standards, in discipline, in soldiers who don't think the rules apply to them just because it's a little chilly outside." A little chilly. Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity, but she suppressed it. She'd survived firefights in the mountains of Afghanistan. She'd endured surgeries that lasted hours. She could survive this. "Sir, I have a medical profile that authorizes." "A medical profile." Brennan's eyebrows shot up, and there was that laugh again, harsh, dismissive. "Let me guess, bad knee, sore shoulder, maybe some hurt feelings from basic training." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the younger soldiers who didn't know better. Sergeant Rodriguez closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. He'd seen Sarah's records, he knew. Sarah's hand twitched at her side, the right hand, the one that still had flesh and bone and feeling. She forced herself to remain calm, professional, even as humiliation began to burn in her chest. "I've been in the Army for 31 years, Brennan continued, warming to his subject now, using her as an example for the entire formation. "And I've heard every excuse imaginable. Back pain, stress, anxiety. You know what we called that in my day, being soft. The modern Army has gotten too comfortable with participation trophies and safe spaces." Sarah's breathing remained controlled, but inside something was cracking. She'd hoped to avoid this. She'd tried so hard to just be another officer, to not be defined by what had happened. But it seemed the universe had other plans. "So here's what's going to happen, Captain," Brennan said, his voice taking on that command tone that expected immediate compliance. "You're going to remove that jacket, get down to your t-shirt like everyone else, and we're going to run 5 miles together. Then maybe you'll think twice about trying to skate out of proper PT standards. Do I make myself clear?" The moment hung in the air like a blade. Sarah looked at the colonel's face, so certain, so convinced of his righteousness. She thought about her options. She could refuse, cite her profile, make this into an official incident, or she could do what he asked and end this public spectacle. But there was no good choice, only varying degrees of exposure. Her right hand moved slowly to the zipper of her jacket. Around her, the formation seemed to collectively lean forward, sensing that something significant was about to happen, even if they didn't know what. Sarah took one deep breath, meeting the colonel's eyes for the first time. Then she began to unzip her jacket, knowing that everything was about to change. Sarah's hand froze on the zipper pull. The metal was cold against her fingers, her real fingers, the ones that could still feel temperature and texture, and the weight of this moment pressing down like an avalanche. She could pull it down and end this humiliation, or she could fight back. Neither option felt like winning. "Sir, with all due respect," Sarah began, her voice measured and professional despite the rage building inside her, "I have a permanent medical profile signed by the Chief of Staff at Walter Reed Medical Center. It's in my personnel file and has been reviewed by the battalion medical officer. I'm authorized to modify my PT uniform as needed." Colonel Brennan's face hardened. He wasn't used to being contradicted, especially not in front of the entire battalion. His jaw clenched, and when he spoke, his voice had dropped to that dangerous quiet that every soldier recognized as the calm before the storm. "Captain Mitchell, I don't care if you have a note from the President himself. What I care about is that you're standing in my formation, in my battalion, looking like you're ready for a ski trip, while everyone else is following the standard." He gestured broadly at the other soldiers, most of whom were desperately trying to look anywhere but at the confrontation unfolding before them. "The profile is legitimate, sir," Sarah insisted, fighting to keep her voice steady. She could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm not trying to avoid PT. I'm following medical guidance." "Medical guidance," Brennan repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. He turned slightly, addressing the formation as much as Sarah now. "You know what's wrong with today's army? Everyone's got a profile. Everyone's got some condition that requires special treatment. In my day, we ran through injuries. We pushed through pain. That's what made us strong." Sergeant Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably in his position 2 rows ahead. He'd served with wounded warriors before, had seen what real sacrifice looked like. He wanted to speak up, to warn the colonel that he was making a terrible mistake, but the chain of command held him silent. This wasn't his fight to fight. "Sir, this isn't about being soft," Sarah said, and for the first time an edge crept into her voice. "This is about following proper medical protocols after." "After what?" Brennan interrupted, taking a step closer. "After you twisted your ankle, pulled a muscle, got a little banged up during deployment." He said the last word with particular emphasis, as if deployment injuries were somehow less worthy of consideration. "I've been deployed 7 times, Captain. 7. I've been blown up, shot at, and I've still never needed special accommodations for PT." The formation was dead silent now. Even the wind had died down, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Private Jenkins, standing near Sarah, felt his stomach twist. He'd heard rumors about Captain Mitchell, whispers in the mess hall about where she'd come from, what she'd been through. But rumors were just that, rumors. Now he wished he'd paid more attention. "I'm not asking for special treatment, Colonel," Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "I'm following the medical guidance I was given by doctors who are too quick to hand out profiles like candy." Brennan's voice rose now, his frustration boiling over. "You know what message this sends to the junior enlisted? That if you want to skate out of hard work, just get a profile. Just claim some invisible injury, and suddenly the standards don't apply." "Invisible injury," Sarah repeated, and something in her voice made several soldiers glance at her sharply. There was a quality to those words, not anger exactly, but something deeper, something that hurt. "Yes, invisible," Brennan pressed on, oblivious to the warning signs. "I don't see anything wrong with you, Captain. You walked to formation just fine. You're standing here just fine. Seems to me the only thing wrong is a lack of discipline and a surplus of excuses." Command Sergeant Major Williams, standing slightly behind the colonel, winced. He'd been reviewing personnel files just yesterday and had seen Sarah Mitchell's name cross his desk. He'd seen the decorations, the medical reports, the recommendation letters. He opened his mouth to intervene, to quietly pull the colonel aside, but Brennan was already speaking again. "So here's what's going to happen," the colonel said, his voice taking on that final order tone. "You're going to stop wasting my time with excuses. You're going to remove that jacket right now and get into proper PT uniform. Then you're going to join the run with everyone else. And if you can't hack it, if you fall out, then maybe we need to have a serious conversation about whether you're fit for duty in this battalion." The words hung in the air like a slap. Fit for duty. After everything Sarah had been through, the surgeries, the rehabilitation, the fight to stay in the army when everyone told her to take the easy way out and retire, this colonel was questioning her fitness for duty because of a jacket. "Sir," Sergeant Rodriguez finally found his voice, unable to stay silent any longer. "Sergeant, unless I asked for your input, I suggest you maintain your position in formation," Brennan snapped without even looking at him. Rodriguez fell silent, but his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Sarah looked at the colonel's face, really looked at it. She saw certainty there, conviction, the absolute belief that he was right and she was wrong. She saw a man who had made up his mind based on assumptions, based on what he thought he saw rather than what was actually true. She'd encountered men like him before, men who believed strength was only one thing, who couldn't imagine sacrifice taking different forms. She thought about walking away, about filing a formal complaint, about going through official channels and letting the system handle this. But standing here, in front of 100 soldiers, with her integrity being questioned and her sacrifice being dismissed as an excuse, Sarah realized that sometimes the only way forward was through. "Colonel Brennan," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the silent formation with crystal clarity, "I need you to understand something. I'm not wearing this jacket because I'm cold. I'm not wearing it because I'm soft. I'm not wearing it to avoid PT." "Then why?" Brennan demanded. "Give me one good reason." Sarah's hand moved back to the zipper. Her real hand, the one that could still grip and pull and feel the cold metal sliding down. She looked the colonel in the eye, and in that moment she made a decision. If he wanted to see, she would show him. If he wanted truth, she would give it to him. And if it humiliated her in front of the entire battalion, at least it would be honest. "Because, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the fear and anger and resignation warring inside her, "some wounds aren't invisible at all. You just have to be willing to look." And with that, she pulled the zipper down. The jacket began to slide off her shoulders, and the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, illuminating what she'd been hiding. In seconds, everything would change. The colonel's certainty would shatter. The formation's silence would deepen into shock, and Sarah Mitchell's carefully constructed anonymity would be stripped away as completely as the jacket falling from her frame. But she didn't stop. She couldn't now. The cold morning air hit her skin, and the truth was finally, irrevocably revealed. The jacket slid off Sarah's shoulders in what felt like slow motion. The heavy fabric pulled away from her body, peeling back like a curtain to reveal what she'd been protecting, what she'd been hiding, what she'd hoped this battalion would never have to see. Not like this. Not as a spectacle. The Army PT shirt underneath was standard issue, gray with black lettering, the same as everyone else wore. But where it should have covered two flesh and blood arms, where it should have draped normally over a complete human form, there was instead something else entirely. Her left arm ended abruptly just below the elbow. In its place was a prosthetic limb, sleek carbon fiber and titanium, matte black with mechanical joints visible at the wrist. It wasn't the cosmetic kind designed to look human. This was functional, built for strength and utility, the type issued to soldiers who intended to keep serving. The morning light caught the metal components, making them gleam against her skin. But it wasn't just the prosthetic. Scars radiated up from where flesh met machine. Angry, raised tissue that spoke of trauma and surgeries and pain beyond imagination. They crawled up her shoulder like twisted roots, disappearing under her shirt collar but clearly continuing further. Her neck bore similar marks, shrapnel scars, burned scars, the kind that came from being too close to an explosion, the kind that came from being lucky enough to survive. The jacket hit the ground with a soft thud. Sarah stood at perfect attention, eyes forward, her jaw set in a rigid line. Her right hand remained at her side, flesh and bone and feeling. Her left hung there too, carbon fiber and metal and the ghost of what used to be. She didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't give Colonel Brennan or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing her break. But inside she was screaming. The silence that fell over the formation was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when the world shifts on its axis, when everything everyone thought they knew gets violently rearranged. Over 100 soldiers stood frozen, their eyes locked on their captain, seeing her, truly seeing her for the first time. Colonel Brennan's face went through a remarkable transformation. The righteous anger that had been there moments before drained away like water from a broken dam. His mouth, which had been set in a hard line of disapproval, fell open slightly. His eyes, which had been narrowed with skepticism, widened with something that looked like horror. The color left his cheeks, leaving him pale in the dawn light. He started, but no other words came. His vocal cords seemed to have forgotten their function. Private Jenkins, standing 2 spots away, felt his stomach drop. He joked about profiles just minutes ago, had laughed at the colonel's comments about soft soldiers. Now bile rose in his throat as he realized what he'd been party to. His hands trembled slightly at his sides. Sergeant Rodriguez closed his eyes briefly, a silent prayer or curse on his lips. He'd known. He'd seen her records. He should have done more to stop this, profile or no profile, chain of command or not. The weight of that failure settled on his shoulders like a physical thing. Command Sergeant Major Williams took an involuntary step forward, his professional composure cracking. He'd read about Captain Mitchell's injuries in her file, had seen the clinical descriptions and medical terminology. But reading about traumatic amputation and seeing its reality were two entirely different things. The abstract became concrete, and it hit him like a punch to the gut. Further back in the formation, Lieutenant Chen, who deployed to Iraq twice, recognized those scars immediately. IED. Had to be. She'd seen enough blast injuries to know the pattern. Her respect for Captain Mitchell, already high, multiplied exponentially. This woman had been through hell and had come back, had fought to stay in uniform, and now stood here being humiliated for it. Sarah maintained her position, but her breathing had become carefully controlled. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The technique they'd taught her at Walter Reed for managing PTSD episodes, for staying grounded when the world felt like it was spinning out of control. She focused on the feeling of the cold air on her skin, the solid ground beneath her boots, anything to stay present and not let the shame overwhelm her. This was her nightmare, the thing she'd dreaded since arriving at Fort Bragg. She'd worked so hard to be seen as just another officer, just another soldier doing her job. She'd worn long sleeves even in summer heat. She'd positioned herself strategically in meetings and formations. She'd built walls around her privacy, around her pain, around the parts of herself that had been left in the Afghan desert. And now those walls were gone, demolished in front of 100 witnesses by a colonel who couldn't see past his own assumptions. Captain Mitchell, I wasn't, Brennan tried again, his voice barely above a whisper now. The commanding boom from moments before had vanished entirely, replaced by something that sounded almost fragile. I had no idea. Sarah's eyes finally moved from their forward focus to meet his. There was no anger in them, which somehow made it worse. Just a deep, weary resignation. No, sir, she said quietly, her voice carrying across the silent formation with devastating clarity. You didn't. The two words held volumes. You didn't know. You didn't ask. You didn't consider that there might be more to the story. You didn't think that maybe, just maybe, a decorated combat veteran might have a legitimate reason for a medical profile. Brennan flinched as if she'd struck him. My profile is current and authorized, Sarah continued, her voice professional despite everything. I'm cleared for modified PT under the supervision of the battalion medical staff. The documentation is in my personnel file, which was forwarded to battalion headquarters 3 weeks ago when I arrived. Each word was precise, military correct, but underneath the professional veneer there was hurt. Deep, profound hurt at being exposed like this, at having her sacrifice used as a teaching moment she never volunteered for. I participate in adapted PT protocols 5 days a week, she went on. Swimming, modified strength training, cardiovascular work designed around my physical capabilities. I exceed the standards for my profile category. I'm not skating. I'm not making excuses. I'm following the medical guidance necessary for me to continue serving. The word serving hung in the air, because that's what she was still doing, still trying to do. Despite everything, the pain, the surgeries, the phantom sensations from an arm that no longer existed, the nightmares, the stares, the questions, the doubt from people who couldn't imagine why someone would fight so hard to stay in after losing so much. She was still serving. Colonel Brennan looked like he wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. His face had gone from pale to flushed, shame coloring his features. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. What could he possibly say? What words could undo what he'd just done? "I need to," he gestured vaguely, unable to complete the thought. His legendary composure had shattered completely. Sarah bent down, the movement practiced, efficient, and retrieved her jacket with her right hand. She pulled it back on, zipping it up with mechanical precision. Each motion was deliberate, controlled. She wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her hands shake, even though they wanted to. The prosthetic disappeared back under the fabric. The scars were hidden again, but everyone had seen. Everyone knew now. There was no taking it back, no returning to the comfortable anonymity she'd built. "Permission to fall out to my assigned, modified PT location, sir?" Sarah asked, her voice steady. Brennan managed a jerky nod, still unable to form coherent sentences. "Battalion," Command Sergeant Major Williams found his voice, stepping forward. "Dismissed." The formation broke apart, but nobody moved with their usual energy. Soldiers dispersed slowly, quietly, many casting glances back at Captain Mitchell as she turned and walked away, her gait revealing now what they'd missed before: the slight hitch in her step, the careful way she moved, the physical cost of survival etched into her very movement. Colonel Brennan stood alone in the center of the training ground as the sun fully crested the horizon, the weight of his mistake settling on him like armor made of lead. He'd wanted to teach a lesson about standards and discipline. Instead, he'd learned one about assumptions and respect. And the tuition had been paid by a soldier who'd already given more than he could possibly imagine. The heat was suffocating. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell wiped sweat from her forehead as she surveyed the village of Marja through her sunglasses. The temperature had to be pushing 115 degrees, the kind of heat that made your body armor feel like an oven and turned every breath into work. Behind her, 2nd Platoon moved in a tactical column, weapons ready, eyes scanning rooftops and windows for threats that could materialize in a heartbeat. "How much farther to the extraction point, ma'am?" Specialist Davis asked, his voice crackling through the radio. Sarah checked her GPS. "Half a click, stay sharp. This is the dangerous part." The dangerous part. As if any part of this mission wasn't dangerous. They'd been tasked with evacuating a group of villagers who'd been providing intelligence to U.S. forces. The Taliban had found out and the family was marked for death. 23 people total, men, women, children, all trusting American soldiers to get them out alive. Sarah's platoon had drawn the short straw. The narrow street ahead wound between mud brick compounds, their walls high enough to hide a dozen fighters. It was an ambush waiting to happen, and every instinct Sarah had developed over 2 deployments was screaming at her. But the mission was clear: get the civilians to the vehicles waiting at the northern edge of the village. "Movement 3 o'clock, Corporal Jackson called out. The platoon shifted, weapons tracking. A door opened and 2 small children emerged, a girl maybe 7 years old, a boy no more than 5. They froze when they saw the soldiers, their eyes wide with fear. Behind them, an elderly woman appeared, gesturing frantically. Sarah's interpreter, Omar, moved forward. "She says Taliban came through last night," Omar translated quickly. "They're planting IEDs on the northern route. She's warning us." Sarah's blood went cold. The northern route, their exact path to extraction. "Tell her thank you," Sarah said, her mind racing. "Ask her if she knows where exactly." The woman shook her head, tears streaming down her weathered face. She pointed generally ahead, then at the children, speaking rapidly in Pashto. "She says her daughter's children," Omar translated. "The mother was killed by Taliban last week. She's begging us to take them when we evacuate the others. Says they'll be killed if they stay." Sarah looked at the 2 small faces staring up at her. The girl held her brother's hand protectively. They were so young, Too young for this war, for this violence, for any of this. We'll take them, Sarah decided. But we need to change our route, if they're watching the northern path. The explosion hit before she could finish the thought. Not where they were standing, 50 meters ahead, where Sergeant Rodriguez had been checking a suspicious pile of rubble with the metal detector. The IED detonated with a force that shook the ground, sending a plume of smoke and debris into the air. "Contact IED," someone screamed. Sarah's training kicked in instantly. "Get down, get the civilians to cover." But even as she gave the order, she saw the setup. The first IED had been the trigger. Now, from the rooftops, muzzle flashes erupted. The Taliban had been waiting, had funneled them exactly where they wanted them. This wasn't an ambush, it was a kill box. "Return fire," Sarah shouted, pulling the two children against the nearest wall as bullets chewed up the street where they'd been standing seconds before. The elderly woman screamed, frozen in the doorway. The platoon responded with disciplined aggression, finding cover and engaging targets on the rooftops. But Sarah's mind was calculating angles, positions, enemy strength. They were pinned. The civilians were scattered, and any second more IEDs could. She saw it in slow motion. The little boy, terrified by the gunfire, broke from her grasp and ran toward his grandmother in the doorway. His sister screamed his name and bolted after him. And Sarah saw, with the horrible clarity that comes in combat, the pressure plate half buried in the dirt directly in their path. Another IED, positioned exactly where panicked civilians would run. Time seemed to compress and expand simultaneously. Sarah was moving before her conscious mind registered the decision. Her legs pumped, closing the distance. 5 meters. 3. The children were steps away from the trigger. "No," Sarah launched herself forward, arms outstretched. She hit both children like a linebacker, wrapping them against her chest and twisting her body to absorb the impact with the wall behind them. They crashed against the mud brick, Sarah's body armor taking the brunt of the collision. The children were screaming, terrified but alive. Safe. For exactly 2 seconds. Then the world exploded. Not the IED the children had been running toward. A different one. One planted in the wall itself, detonated remotely by a Taliban fighter who saw the American officer protecting the children and decided that was the perfect moment to strike. The blast wave hit Sarah like a freight train. She felt her body lift off the ground, felt the sudden searing heat, felt shrapnel tear through her left side. The children were ripped from her grasp. Her helmet was torn off. The world became a maelstrom of sound and fury and pain beyond description. She hit the ground hard, her left arm twisted at an unnatural angle beneath her. When she tried to move it, nothing happened. No response. She looked down and immediately wished she hadn't. Her left arm from the elbow down was barely attached, held together by strips of muscle and skin. Bone protruded white against red. Blood pooled beneath her, spreading across the dirt in a growing circle. The amount of blood seemed impossible. "Corpsman," someone was screaming. "Corpsman UP." Faces appeared above her, Davis, Jackson, others whose names suddenly seemed far away. Hands pressed against her arm, her shoulder. A tourniquet bit into her bicep with agonizing pressure. "Stay with me, LT." Sergeant Rodriguez's face swam into view, his hands covered in her blood. "You're gonna be fine, you hear me? You're gonna be fine." But Sarah wasn't looking at him. She was looking past him where medics were working on 2 small shapes on the ground. The children, were they alive? Had her sacrifice meant anything? "The kids," she managed to gasp, her voice weak. "Are they?" "They're alive, ma'am," Rodriguez said, and she could hear tears in his voice. "You saved them. They're alive because of you." The pain was becoming distant now, which some rational part of Sarah's mind recognized as a bad sign. Shock, blood loss, her body shutting down non-essential systems to protect the core. "Medevac is 5 minutes out," someone shouted. 5 minutes, an eternity. Doc Martinez appeared, the platoon medic, his young face pale as he worked on her arm. "I've got the bleeding controlled, LT, but we need to get you out of here now." More gunfire erupted. The Taliban were pressing their advantage, trying to finish what they'd started. Sarah could hear her platoon returning fire, could hear orders being shouted, could hear the distinctive thump of an M203 grenade launcher. "Get the civilians out," Sarah whispered to Rodriguez. "That's the mission, get them out." "We're getting everyone out," Rodriguez promised, "including you." The morphine Martinez had administered was kicking in, making everything soft and distant. Sarah felt herself being lifted onto a stretcher, felt the jarring movement as they ran with her toward the evacuation point. The rotor wash of the incoming helicopter hit her face like a physical thing. Strong hands loaded her into the bird. The crew chief's face appeared above her, young and scared behind his professional competence. "You're gonna make it, ma'am. Stay with us." As the helicopter lifted off, Sarah turned her head slightly. Through the open door, she could see her platoon still fighting, still protecting those civilians. She could see the 2 children being carried by soldiers toward safety. Alive, breathing, whole. Her left arm was ruined, possibly unsalvageable. The pain was trying to break through the morphine in waves that made her gasp. Her career was probably over. Her life was definitely changed forever. But those children were alive. Sarah closed her eyes as the helicopter banked hard, racing toward the trauma center at Kandahar. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she could already feel the phantom sensations from her mangled arm, the fingers that would never move again, the hand that would never feel again. She didn't know it yet, but in 18 months she'd be standing in a PT formation at Fort Bragg, being accused of making excuses. She didn't know that her sacrifice would be questioned, her profile dismissed, her wounds called invisible. But right now, in this moment, bleeding out in the sky over Afghanistan, Sarah Mitchell only knew one thing. She'd do it all again in a heartbeat. The children were alive. And that was enough. Sarah woke screaming. Again. The night nurse, Captain Lisa Chen, was at her bedside in seconds, her hands gentle but firm on Sarah's shoulders. "You're safe. You're at Walter Reed. You're in Maryland, not Afghanistan. You're safe." But Sarah's mind was still in Marja, still feeling the explosion, still seeing those children's faces in the microsecond before the blast. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Sweat soaked through her hospital gown, and her left arm, the arm that wasn't there anymore, burned with a pain so intense she wanted to vomit. "Phantom pain?" Chen asked, already reaching for the medication cart. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. The pain was impossible to explain to someone who'd never experienced it. How could an arm that no longer existed hurt so badly? How could she feel her fingers curling, her wrist bending, sensations from nerve endings that had been blown apart by an IED 18 months ago? It had been 3 weeks since the amputation. 3 weeks since the surgeons at Landstuhl had told her there was no saving what remained of her left arm below the elbow. Infection had set in during the emergency surgeries in Afghanistan. The tissue was too damaged, the bone too shattered. It was her arm or her life. Sarah had chosen life, barely. Here, Chen administered the medication through the IV line. "This should help. But Sarah, you need to talk to someone about the nightmares. They're getting worse, not better." Sarah closed her eyes, waiting for the medication to dull the phantom agony. "I'll add it to my list of problems." The list was long: traumatic amputation, shrapnel wounds across her shoulder and neck, second-degree burns, PTSD that manifested in nightmares, hypervigilance, and panic attacks triggered by loud noises, depression that made some days feel like swimming through concrete, and the question that haunted her every waking moment: what now? 6 weeks post-amputation. "I want you to meet someone," Dr. James Paulson said, wheeling Sarah down the corridor of the amputee ward. His name is Major Rick Thompson. Lost both legs to an IED in Iraq 4 years ago. Sarah had been at Walter Reed for a month and a half. The acute medical crisis had passed, but the real work was just beginning. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychological counseling, learning to live in a body that had been fundamentally altered. Major Thompson was in the gym, working the parallel bars with prosthetic legs that looked like something from a science fiction movie. He moved with surprising grace, his upper body strength evident in every step. "Thompson, this is Lieutenant Mitchell," Paulson introduced them, "fresh from Afghanistan." Thompson looked up, and Sarah saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in weeks, understanding without pity. "Let me guess," he said, still working the bars. "You're wondering if life is ever going to feel normal again." Sarah's throat tightened, something like that. "It won't," Thompson said bluntly, and Sarah felt her heart sink. Then he smiled. "But you'll find a new normal, one that's pretty damn good if you're willing to fight for it. You planning to stay in?" I don't know if they'll let me," Sarah admitted. "Then make them let you," Thompson said simply. "You didn't survive an IED just to give up now." 3 months post-amputation. The prosthetic felt wrong. Sarah stared at the carbon fiber and titanium appendage attached to her residual limb, trying to will it to feel like part of her body. The prosthetist, a cheerful woman named Dr. Angela Morrison, adjusted the socket for the 3rd time that session. "It takes time," Morrison said. "Your brain needs to learn to integrate the prosthetic into your body schema. Right now, it feels like a foreign object because, well, it is. But with practice, with repetition, it'll start to feel more natural." "How much time?" Sarah asked, frustration bleeding into her voice. "Everyone's different. Some people adapt in weeks, others take months. You're doing better than most, actually." Sarah looked at the therapy putty she was supposed to be squeezing with the prosthetic hand. She'd been working for 20 minutes and had managed maybe a dozen successful grips. Simple tasks, buttoning a shirt, tying her boots, eating with a fork, had become monumental challenges. "I used to do 40 pull-ups," Sarah said quietly. "I could field strip an M4 in under a minute. I led a platoon through combat. And now I can't even open a goddamn water bottle." Morrison's expression softened. "Lieutenant Mitchell, 3 months ago you nearly died. You lost your arm saving children's lives. Give yourself some grace. The warrior you were isn't gone. She's just learning new tactics." 6 months post-amputation. The evaluation board sat before her like a firing squad. 3 senior officers, 2 medical professionals, and a representative from the Department of the Army. They held Sarah's future in their hands. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Colonel Andrews began, reviewing the papers before him, "your medical records indicate significant progress in your rehabilitation. However, the question before this board is whether you're capable of continuing service in an active duty capacity." Sarah sat ramrod straight in her dress uniform, the left sleeve pinned neatly where her arm should have been. She'd chosen not to wear the prosthetic today. Let them see what they were evaluating. "Sir, I understand the board's concerns," Sarah began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I'd like to present evidence of my capabilities." She opened her tablet with her right hand. She'd become remarkably proficient one-handed, and brought up a video. The board watched as Sarah demonstrated her adapted PT routine, swimming laps, modified pull-ups using a specialized grip, running on the treadmill with her prosthetic lifting weights. "I exceed the adapted PT standards for my category," Sarah continued. "I've maintained my marksmanship qualification with modified techniques. I've completed leadership courses and updated my tactical certifications." "Lieutenant, no one doubts your determination," Dr. Reston, one of the medical evaluators, said gently. "But the question is whether the Army can accommodate your limitations in a meaningful role." "Limitations," Sarah repeated. Sir, with respect, I don't see them as limitations. I see them as adaptations. The Army has invested years in my training, my education, my leadership development. I have institutional knowledge, combat experience, and the ability to mentor junior officers. Are you suggesting that's all worthless because I lost my arm? The room fell silent. The Army is full of staff positions, training roles, and leadership opportunities that don't require two arms, Sarah pressed on. What I lack in physical capability, I make up for in experience and determination. And frankly, I think I have something else to offer. I'm proof that wounded doesn't mean finished. Colonel Andrews leaned back, studying her. You really want to stay in? Sir, the Army is my home, my purpose. The day I stop serving is the day they carry me out. I'm not ready for that day yet. 9 months post-amputation. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Sarah opened it with trembling fingers, her real ones, the ones that could still feel paper and anticipation and fear. Dear Captain Mitchell, after careful review of your case, this board is pleased to inform you that your request for continuation on active duty has been approved. Sarah had to read it 3 times before the words sank in. Approved. They were letting her stay. She was being promoted to captain and reassigned to Fort Bragg for a staff position in battalion operations. She was still a soldier. In her small apartment at Walter Reed, surrounded by physical therapy equipment and medical paperwork, Sarah allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness or pain, but from relief, from gratitude, from the overwhelming knowledge that the fight to stay in, the months of grueling therapy, the psychological battles, the evaluation boards, the doubt and fear and determination, had been worth it. Her phone rang. It was Major Thompson. I heard, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Congratulations, Captain. Told you that you'd find your new normal. Sarah looked at her prosthetic arm resting on the table, then at her reflection in the mirror, scars visible on her neck, her left sleeve hanging empty in this moment of privacy. Yeah, she said softly, I guess I did. She didn't know that in 9 months, she'd be standing in a cold PT formation at Fort Bragg, being humiliated by a colonel who couldn't see past his assumptions. But right now, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was a survivor, a warrior, a soldier. And no one, not the Taliban, not the injuries, not the doubters, could take that away from her. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Colonel Brennan stood frozen as the formation dispersed around him, soldiers moving away in unusual silence. His mouth opened and closed, searching for words that wouldn't come. What could he possibly say? What apology could undo what he'd just done? Captain Mitchell, he finally managed, his voice rough and uncertain, so different from the commanding boom of minutes before. I didn't know. I should have. I mean, I had no idea that you were. Sarah bent down with practiced efficiency and retrieved her jacket, pulling it back on with her right hand. The zipper moved up smoothly, hiding the prosthetic, concealing the scars. But it was too late. Everyone had seen. The secret she'd guarded so carefully was gone. No, sir, you didn't know, Sarah said quietly, her voice professionally neutral despite the storm raging inside her. Because you didn't ask. You didn't check my file. You didn't consider that there might be a legitimate reason for my profile. Each word landed like a precision strike. Brennan flinched. My medical profile is current and on file with battalion headquarters, Sarah continued, her military bearing perfect, her tone respectful but firm. It was submitted 3 weeks ago when I arrived. It's signed by the Chief of Medical Staff at Walter Reed and countersigned by your battalion surgeon. I'm authorized for modified PT protocols, which I complete 5 days a week under medical supervision. I'm not skating, sir. I'm following orders. I understand, Brennan said weakly. I should have. Permission to fall out to my assigned PT location, sir. Sarah interrupted, not interested in hearing whatever inadequate apology he was formulating. Brennan nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "Permission granted, Captain." Sarah executed a crisp salute with her right hand that Brennan numbly returned. Then she turned on her heel and walked away, her gait revealing what everyone could now see. The slight hitch in her step, the careful way she balanced, the physical cost of survival written into her very movement. Command Sergeant Major Williams stepped up beside Brennan as Sarah disappeared around the corner of a building. "Sir, we need to talk." "Not now, Sergeant Major," Brennan said, his voice hollow. "With respect, sir, yes now. That woman is a decorated combat veteran. Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart. She lost that arm saving Afghan children from an IED, and you just humiliated her in front of the entire battalion." Brennan's face went even paler. "Silver Star. You would have known that if you'd read her file instead of making assumptions," Williams said, his tone carefully neutral but his eyes hard. "I'm going to check on her. You might want to figure out how you're going to fix this, sir." Williams walked away, leaving Brennan alone on the training ground as the sun continued to rise, oblivious to his shame. By 800 hours, the entire base knew. The story spread through Fort Bragg like wildfire. In the mess hall, over coffee, in offices and barracks and motor pools, soldiers talked about nothing else. The details varied. Some said she'd lost both arms, others that she'd been burned over half her body, but the core story remained consistent. Captain Sarah Mitchell, the quiet staff officer who kept to herself, was a war hero, and Colonel Brennan had publicly humiliated her for having a medical profile. In the company offices, Sergeant Rodriguez sat with his head in his hands. "I should have said something. I saw her records, I knew." "You were maintaining the chain of command," Lieutenant Chen said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's not your fault." "Isn't it?" Rodriguez looked up, anguish in his eyes. "I watched that whole thing happen and said nothing until it was too late. She was standing there being called soft, being accused of making excuses, and I just stood there." Private Jenkins sat nearby, his coffee untouched. He'd barely spoken since formation. The image of Captain Mitchell's prosthetic arm, the scars, the look on her face, it was burned into his mind. He'd laughed when the colonel made jokes about profiles. He'd thought it was funny. He felt sick. Sarah made it to her office before the trembling started. Her hands shook as she closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it. The professional composure she'd maintained through the confrontation cracked, and suddenly she couldn't breathe properly. Her chest felt tight, her heart raced, and the familiar signs of a panic attack washed over her. Not here, not now. She'd made it through the humiliation, through the exposure, through maintaining her dignity in front of 100 witnesses. She couldn't fall apart now. Sarah slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor, her knees pulled up to her chest. Breathing exercises. Count to 4 breathing in. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The technique they'd taught her at Walter Reed for managing PTSD episodes. But this wasn't combat-related PTSD. This was a different kind of trauma, the violation of privacy, the forced exposure of wounds she'd worked so hard to keep hidden. Not because she was ashamed of them, but because she wanted to be seen as a soldier first, not as a wounded warrior, not as an inspiration, not as a tragedy. She'd spent 9 months fighting to stay in the Army. 9 months proving she could still serve, still lead, still contribute. She'd worked so hard to be treated normally, to be just another officer doing her job. And in 5 minutes, Colonel Brennan had stripped all of that away. Now she'd be that captain, the one with the prosthetic arm, the one who got humiliated at PT formation, the one everyone would whisper about, feel sorry for, treat differently. They'd see the arm first, the scars second, and the soldier somewhere far down the list. A knock at the door made her jump. "Captain Mitchell, it's Command Sergeant Major Williams. Can I come in?" Sarah wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and stood. She unlocked the door and opened it, her professional mask sliding back into place even though her eyes were red. Williams's expression softened when he saw her. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Sergeant Major," Sarah said automatically. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." Sarah nodded. "That's bullshit," Williams said gently. "What happened out there was wrong, completely, unacceptably wrong, and you don't have to be fine about it." The kindness in his voice nearly broke her again. Sarah swallowed hard. I worked so hard to blend in, to not be special or different, and now everyone knows," Williams finished. "And I'm sorry about that. You deserved better. You deserved privacy and respect and a commanding officer who did his homework before opening his mouth." "It doesn't matter," Sarah said, but her voice cracked slightly. "What's done is done." "It does matter," Williams insisted. "And for what it's worth, the NCOs are furious. Half the officers are talking about filing complaints. You've got support here, ma'am, more than you realize." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "The colonel asked me to tell you he wants to meet with you, privately, to apologize properly." Williams's expression suggested what he thought of that idea. "You don't have to agree to it if you don't want to. I can tell him you're not available." Sarah considered. Part of her wanted to refuse, to make Brennan sit with his shame. But another part, the professional part, the part that understood the military hierarchy, knew that avoiding him would only make things worse. "Tomorrow," she said, "tell him I'll meet with him tomorrow. I need today to process this." "Understood, ma'am." Williams hesitated. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Want me to clear your schedule for the day?" "No," Sarah said, straightening her shoulders. "I have work to do, reports to file, meetings to attend. If I hide, it confirms every doubt anyone ever had about whether I can still do this job." Williams looked at her with something approaching awe. "You're one tough soldier, Captain Mitchell." After he left, Sarah sat at her desk and stared at her computer screen without seeing it. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, text messages from people she barely knew, offering support, expressing outrage, asking if she was okay. She ignored them all. Outside her window, she could see soldiers moving between buildings, going about their duties. Some glanced toward her office. Word had definitely spread. By lunch, the entire division would know. By evening, the story would probably hit social media. Her privacy, her carefully constructed normal life, was gone. Sarah looked down at her left arm, still hidden under the jacket sleeve, and felt the phantom pain flare up. Stress always made it worse. Her fingers that weren't there anymore curled and cramped. Her wrist that no longer existed ached. She'd survived an IED. She'd survived multiple surgeries. She'd survived the fight to stay in the army. She'd survived this too. But as she sat alone in her office, the morning sun streaming through the windows, Sarah Mitchell allowed herself one moment of honest grief for what she'd lost today. Not her arm, she'd grieved for that already. But her anonymity, her privacy, her ability to be just another soldier. That she'd never get back. Colonel Brennan's office, 2100 hours. The scotch sat untouched on James Brennan's desk, amber liquid catching the light from his computer screen. He'd poured it an hour ago, thinking it might help. It hadn't. Nothing could help with what he was reading. Captain Sarah J. Mitchell's service record filled his monitor, and with each page, the weight in his chest grew heavier. Silver Star citation. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States while serving as platoon leader, 2nd Platoon, Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 508th Infantry Regiment, in support of Operation Enduring Freedom in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. On 15 June, Lieutenant Mitchell's platoon was conducting a civilian evacuation operation in the village of Marja when they came under coordinated enemy attack. When 2 Afghan children ran toward a known IED threat, Lieutenant Mitchell, with complete disregard for her own safety, shielded the children with her body. The subsequent explosion resulted in catastrophic injuries to Lieutenant Mitchell, including traumatic amputation and severe shrapnel wounds. Despite her wounds, Lieutenant Mitchell maintained command of her platoon, directing return fire and coordinating the medical evacuation of wounded personnel before allowing treatment for herself. Her actions directly resulted in the successful evacuation of 23 Afghan civilians and saved the lives of 2 children who would have otherwise been killed. Lieutenant Mitchell's extraordinary heroism and selfless service reflect great credit upon herself and are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service. Brennan's hands trembled as he scrolled down. There was more, so much more. Bronze Star with Valor device for leading her platoon through an 8-hour firefight while outnumbered 3-1, personally carrying a wounded soldier to safety under heavy fire. Purple Heart for wounds received in action. Army Commendation Medal with Valor device for exceptional courage during a vehicle ambush. Combat Infantryman Badge, Expert Infantryman Badge, Ranger Qualified. 2 deployments to Afghanistan, 3 years in combat zones before the age of 30. He clicked on the after-action reports. Read the statements from her soldiers. LT Mitchell is the bravest officer I've ever served under. She never asked us to do anything she wouldn't do herself. When that IED went off, she didn't hesitate. She just moved. I've never seen anything like it. Specialist Marcus Davis. She saved those kids, saved them without thinking about the cost. That's who she is. That's who she's always been. The best leader I've ever had. Sergeant First Class Miguel Rodriguez. Ma'am kept giving orders even with her arm blown off, kept the platoon together, kept us fighting. We all made it out because of her, every single one of us. Corporal James Jackson. Brennan closed his eyes, but the words were burned into his mind. He opened another folder, medical records that made his stomach turn. 14 surgeries, months of physical therapy, complications from infection, psychological trauma requiring ongoing treatment. The clinical descriptions of her injuries were horrific: shattered bone, severed nerves, tissue loss, burns. And through it all, through the pain and the rehabilitation and the evaluations, she'd fought to stay in the Army. Board after board had questioned her fitness, suggested medical retirement, offered her an honorable way out. She'd refused every time. There was a letter in her file from Major General Hastings, written 6 months after her injury. Captain Mitchell represents the finest qualities of the American soldier. Her determination to continue serving, despite injuries that would have ended most careers, is a testament to her character and dedication. She has not only met the standards required for continuation on active duty, she has exceeded them. Any unit would be fortunate to have her. Brennan leaned back in his chair, the weight of his mistake crushing down on him. This morning he'd stood in front of his battalion and called this woman soft, accused her of making excuses, questioned her dedication, humiliated her publicly. A decorated war hero who'd literally sacrificed her arm saving children. And he'd mocked her for wearing a jacket. The scotch remained untouched as Brennan sat in his office until well past midnight, reading every document, every citation, every evaluation, building a complete picture of who Captain Sarah Mitchell really was, not the assumption he'd made, but the reality he'd been too arrogant to see. When he finally went home, he didn't sleep. Battalion headquarters, 900 hours next day. Sarah stood outside Colonel Brennan's office, her jaw set. She debated canceling this meeting a dozen times, but avoiding it would solve nothing. Better to face it head-on, establish professional boundaries, and move forward. She knocked twice. "Come in," Brennan's voice called. Sarah entered and came to attention. Brennan stood behind his desk, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His normally crisp uniform looked rumpled. "At ease, Captain," he said quietly. "Please sit down." Sarah took the offered chair, her posture rigid, professional, guarded. Brennan sat across from her, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then he took a deep breath. "Captain Mitchell, I owe you an apology. Not the half-assed attempt I made yesterday, but a real one." His voice was steady but filled with genuine remorse. "What I did yesterday morning was inexcusable. I made assumptions based on ignorance. I questioned your dedication and integrity without knowing anything about you, and I humiliated you publicly in a way that was cruel and unprofessional." Sarah remained silent, watching him carefully. "I spent last night reading your service record," Brennan continued. "Your citations, your evaluations, the statements from your soldiers. I read about what happened in Marja, about how you saved those children, about your fight to stay in the army." He paused, his voice roughening. "And I realized that I have never, in 31 years of service, met a soldier who embodies the Army values more completely than you do." "Sir," Sarah began. "Please let me finish," Brennan said. "You have every right to file a formal complaint against me. What I did was conduct unbecoming. It was leadership failure of the worst kind. I let my assumptions override my judgment, and I hurt someone who deserved nothing but respect." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the base. "I tell myself I'm old school, that I maintain standards, that I don't coddle soldiers, but yesterday I learned something about myself that I don't like very much." He turned back to face her. "I was so focused on what I expected to see that I completely failed to see what was actually there. A decorated combat veteran, a leader, a soldier who's sacrificed more than I can imagine." Sarah's throat tightened, but she kept her composure. "I can't undo what I did," Brennan said. "I can't give you back your privacy or erase the humiliation. But I can tell you this, I was wrong. Completely, absolutely wrong. And I'm sorry. Not because it's the politically correct thing to say, but because I genuinely failed you as a commander, and that failure will haunt me." The silence stretched between them. Sarah studied the man before her, seeing not the arrogant colonel from yesterday, but someone genuinely grappling with a mistake that had shaken his self-perception. "I appreciate the apology, sir," Sarah finally said, her voice measured. "And I accept it. You're right, you made assumptions. You didn't check the facts. You let your expectations override reality. Those are all leadership failures." Brennan nodded, accepting the rebuke. "But," Sarah continued, "the damage is done. My privacy is gone. Everyone on this base now knows my medical history, my injuries, my story. I worked very hard to be seen as just another officer, to be judged on my current performance, not on my past sacrifice. Yesterday, you took that away from me." "I know," Brennan said quietly, "and I can't fix that, but I can promise you this, going forward you will be evaluated solely on your merit, your performance, your contributions. Not on sympathy, not on your injuries, but on the quality of your work. You wanted to be treated normally, that's what you'll get." Sarah met his eyes. "That's all I've ever wanted, sir." "Then that's what you'll have," Brennan promised. "Additionally, I'm implementing new protocols for medical profiles battalion-wide. No more public confrontations, no more assumptions, and I'm scheduling training for all leaders on invisible wounds and accommodation requirements." "That would be appreciated, sir." Brennan returned to his desk. "I also reviewed the staff position you're currently assigned to. You're overqualified for it. I'd like to offer you a position as the Battalion Operations Officer. It's a key leadership role that utilizes your combat experience and tactical knowledge, if you're interested." Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's a significant position, sir." "And you're significantly qualified for it," Brennan said firmly. "This isn't charity. This isn't me trying to make myself feel better. This is me recognizing that I have a decorated combat veteran with exceptional leadership skills, and I've been wasting her in a dead-end admin job. Will you take it?" Sarah considered. Operations officer was a demanding position, but it was also meaningful. It would use her experience, challenge her abilities, give her real influence. "Yes, sir," she said. "I'll take it." Brennan extended his hand, his right hand, as Sarah would need to shake with hers. "Then welcome to the team, Captain. The real team this time." Sarah shook his hand, and for the first time since yesterday morning she felt something shift. Not forgiveness exactly. The wound was too fresh for that, but perhaps the beginning of moving forward. As she left his office, Sarah realized something. Brennan had done more than apologize. He'd listened. He'd learned. He'd changed. And that, she thought, was the difference between a mistake and a failure. Mistakes could be corrected. Failures were permanent. Colonel Brennan had made a terrible mistake, but he was trying to correct it. That would have to be enough. 3 months later, Fort Bragg. The Monday morning formation looked different now. Colonel Brennan stood at the front, but the atmosphere had changed in subtle but significant ways. Soldiers with medical profiles wore their authorized modifications without fear. The inspection was thorough but respectful. And when Brennan spoke, his words carried a different weight, the authority of someone who'd learned a hard lesson and grown from it. "Before we begin PT, I want to address something," Brennan announced, his voice carrying across the assembled battalion. "3 months ago, I made a serious error in judgment. I let my assumptions override my respect for one of this battalion's finest officers. Many of you witnessed it. All of you heard about it." The formation was silent, every eye on their commander. "I'm not bringing this up to rehash the past," Brennan continued. "I'm bringing it up because that moment taught me something crucial about leadership. Real strength isn't always visible. Real dedication doesn't always look the way we expect. And real warriors come in many forms, some with visible wounds, some with invisible ones, all deserving of our respect and support." He paused, scanning the faces before him. "We've implemented new protocols since then. Medical profiles are now reviewed and honored without question. We've established a wounded warrior support program. We've trained every leader in this battalion on accommodations and respect. But more than policy changes, I hope we've changed our culture. I hope we've learned to see each other, really see each other, before making judgments." From her position in the staff section, Captain Sarah Mitchell stood at attention, her PT jacket properly worn per her profile. But now, several other soldiers stood similarly dressed, no longer afraid to use their authorized accommodations, no longer worried about being singled out or shamed. "Battalion, fall out to your PT groups," Brennan ordered. "Captain Mitchell, a moment please." Sarah approached as the formation dispersed. Over the past 3 months, her working relationship with Brennan had evolved into something unexpected: mutual respect. He'd proven his apology wasn't empty words by giving her real responsibility, real authority, and real support. "Captain, I wanted to let you know the Wounded Warrior PT program you proposed has been approved at division level," Brennan said, a hint of pride in his voice. "You'll start running it next week. They're also asking if you'd be willing to speak at the division leadership conference about adaptive fitness protocols." Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. Public speaking about her injuries still wasn't easy, but it was important. "Yes, sir, I'll do it." "Good. Your work as operations officer has been exceptional, by the way. The training exercise you designed last month was the best we've run in years. The brigade commander specifically mentioned it." "Thank you, sir. The team made it happen." Brennan nodded. "That's exactly what a good leader says." Dismissed, Captain. The Wounded Warrior PT session, 1 week later. Sarah stood at the Adaptive Fitness Center, a new facility the battalion had established in an old warehouse. Exercise equipment had been modified for various injuries. Trained staff stood ready to assist, and gathering before her were 15 soldiers, each dealing with their own physical challenges. Some were amputees like her. Others had traumatic brain injuries, chronic pain conditions, PTSD that made traditional group PT overwhelming. One soldier was in a wheelchair. Another had severe burn scars. Each one had been cleared for modified PT but had struggled to find appropriate programming. "Good morning," Sarah said, her voice confident but warm. "I'm Captain Mitchell, and I'll be running this program. Before we start, I want you to understand something. This isn't remedial PT. This isn't the broken soldiers group. This is advanced adaptive training designed to maximize your individual capabilities." She unzipped her PT jacket and pulled it off, revealing her prosthetic arm without hesitation. The movement that had once felt like exposure now felt like connection. "3 months ago, I was standing in a formation being told I was soft because I wore a jacket like this," Sarah continued. "I was accused of making excuses, of being less than a soldier, and for a while I believed it. I hid my injuries because I was afraid of being seen as weak." The soldiers before her listened intently, recognition in their eyes. "But here's what I've learned. Adapting isn't weakness. It's intelligence. Finding new ways to meet the standard isn't cheating, it's innovation. And being wounded doesn't make you less of a warrior. Sometimes it makes you more of one because you had to fight twice as hard to stay in the fight." Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, who'd requested to join the program to support the soldiers, stood off to the side with a slight smile. This was the leader he'd known in Afghanistan, strong, inspiring, unafraid. "So here's how this works," Sarah said. "We train hard, we push limits, we support each other, and we prove that wounded doesn't mean finished." Questions. A young corporal with a prosthetic leg raised his hand. "Ma'am, do you ever regret staying in, after everything?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "Sometimes the phantom pain keeps me up at night. Sometimes I have flashbacks that make me question everything. Sometimes I look at this arm and grieve for what I lost." She paused. "But regret staying in? Never. This uniform is who I am. The day I stop serving is the day they carry me out. Until then, I adapt and I overcome." She smiled. "Now let's get to work." 6 months after the incident, morning formation. The November wind cut across Fort Bragg again, almost exactly a year since Sarah had first arrived. But everything was different now. Colonel Brennan conducted his inspection with the same high standards but tempered with wisdom. When he passed soldiers with profiles, he nodded respectfully, checked in professionally, and moved on without drama or judgment. When he reached the staff section where Sarah stood, he paused. "Captain Mitchell, how's the Wounded Warrior program going?" "Exceeding expectations, sir. We have 23 participants now, and several are qualifying for return to full-duty status. The ones who aren't are finding meaningful ways to continue serving." "Outstanding. Keep up the good work." As Brennan moved on, Private Jenkins, now a specialist, leaned slightly toward Sarah. He'd requested a transfer to work under her in operations and had become one of her most dedicated soldiers. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" he whispered. "After formation, specialist." Later in her office, Jenkins stood nervously. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize for that morning. I laughed when the colonel— I didn't know, but that's not an excuse. I should have been better." Sarah studied the young soldier. He'd grown considerably in 6 months, not just in rank but in maturity and understanding. "Specialist Jenkins, you know what I've learned. Everyone makes mistakes based on assumptions. Everyone has moments they're not proud of. The question is, do you learn from them? Do you grow?" "I'm trying to, ma'am." "I can see that, and that's what matters," she smiled. "Now about that training plan you submitted." Evening, Sarah's apartment. Sarah sat on her couch, her prosthetic arm resting on the coffee table beside her. She'd taken it off for the evening, something she only did in private. Her laptop was open to an email from Major Thompson, her mentor from Walter Reed. "Sarah, heard about the program you started at Bragg. Heard about what happened with your co-2. Glad." He pulled his head out and recognized what he had. "You're doing exactly what I knew you would, changing the game for wounded warriors, making the Army better. Keep fighting the good fight. You're making a difference." "Thompson." Sarah smiled and typed a response. Then she pulled up a different document, a speech she was preparing for the division leadership conference. The title read, Strength Reimagined, Leadership Lessons from Adaptive Warriors. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sergeant Rodriguez. Ma'am, just wanted to say I'm proud to serve with you. You've changed this battalion for the better. Sarah's throat tightened. 6 months ago, she'd been standing in a formation feeling exposed and humiliated, her privacy stripped away, her sacrifice used as a spectacle. She'd thought her career at Fort Bragg was over before it began. But from that painful moment had come something unexpected. Change. Real, meaningful change. A battalion that now valued all its soldiers. A program that helped wounded warriors thrive. A commanding officer who'd learned to lead with wisdom instead of just authority. And Sarah herself had found a new purpose, not just serving but lifting others up. She looked at her prosthetic arm on the table. For so long she'd seen it as something to hide, something that marked her as different, as less than. But now she saw it differently. It was a testament to survival, to resilience, to the courage it took to keep fighting when everything told you to give up. Sarah walked to her window and looked out at Fort Bragg. Somewhere on this base, there were soldiers struggling with their own wounds, visible and invisible. There were leaders learning to be better. There were young privates who would one day be sergeants and captains and colonels, carrying forward the lessons learned from one painful morning formation. She thought about those 2 Afghan children she'd saved. They'd be older now, the girl maybe 9, the boy 7. Were they safe? Were they thriving? She'd never know. But she'd made a choice in that split second before the explosion. Their lives mattered more than her arm. She'd make the same choice again. Just like she'd make the choice to stay in the army again, to fight for her place, to prove that wounded didn't mean finished. Tomorrow morning there would be another formation, another PT session. More soldiers to mentor, more leaders to train, more work to do. Her arm would still be gone. The scars would still be there. The phantom pain would likely wake her at 300. But she would also still be Captain Sarah Mitchell, still a soldier, still serving, still fighting. And that made everything, the pain, the sacrifice, the struggle, worth it. Sarah raised her right hand in a solitary salute to her reflection in the window. Not to mourn what was lost, but to honor what remained. A warrior, a leader, a soldier who refused to quit. The morning formation had tried to break her. Instead, it had revealed her strength. And that strength would echo through Fort Bragg long after she was gone, in every soldier who learned that true courage means adapting, overcoming, and never giving up. No matter the cost.